Hello and welcome back. Today we'll show you how to make two different ways of making pizza at home, both being far cheaper and far tastier than any takeaway you'll be able to buy. The first method we will show is a Detroit style pizza, a method that I saw on Food Wishes on YouTube by Chef John. This style is cooked within a pan, with the toppings going underneath the cheese and the sauce going on top, also using cubed cheese rather than grated, as when placed around the sides of the tray, the rendered cheese fat will run down the sides of the crust and begin to fry some of the bread, creating a delicious crust. The next method is for a more classic Italian thin crust pizza. We're using a pizza steel, as this is the best way to recreate restaurant style pizzas at home, as it releases a lot of heat, creating a very nice crust on the bottom, and a very fastly cooked pizza. However, this is not easy to find or necessarily cheap. An alternatives we've used before is a pizza stone, or the bottom side of a cast iron pan, which are much more affordable. However, you can just use a normal metal baking tray, with cooking times being slightly longer and the end result being slightly different, but will still be delicious. We also use a large wide mixing bowl. This is mainly so we can mix and knead all of the dough within the bowl. We begin by having our camera not in focus and adding 675 milliliters of warm water to the bowl, 15 grams of dry activated yeast, and around 38 to 40 grams of sugar. Giving it a mix, and you can let it sit for around 10 to 15 minutes to see if the yeast is alive, but if your yeast is new, like ours was, you shouldn't need to do this step. We then focus our camera and add 22 grams of salt and around 4 to 5 tablespoons of olive oil. We add it here instead of later like a lot of other recipes. I find that oil is very hard to knead into dough, and this stops that happening. We saw this idea from YouTuber Adam Ragusea. We give that a mix and then add half of the flour, and giving that a mix until it looks like a porridge consistency. I do this as I find it helps incorporate the olive oil into all of the bread. We then add the other half of the flour and start to mix with our hands, as a wooden spoon would no longer be worth using. Once it forms a slightly sticky ball, begin to knead it, making sure you get all of the scraps of the flour incorporated into the dough. This may feel too sticky at first, but if you keep kneading at it, a soft ball will form eventually. If you feel like you need to add some more flour, make sure you add very small amounts at a time. We know our dough is ready, as when we push into it, it springs back up about 60% of the way, as well as being soft to touch. We then use 6 baskets to rise our dough in, coating in olive oil and rubbing all the way around it to stop the dough from sticking. We then cut 1/6 of our dough off and fold it in on itself to create a ball, rubbing it in our hands to make sure that the ball is an even shape. We then place in the basket with olive oil, making sure it's fully coated. Repeat with the other 5 baskets and cover with a damp tea towel, letting rise for 6 hours at room temperature or between 1 to 3 days in the fridge. We then make a very simple pizza sauce, starting with 1 tin of tomatoes that have been blended, a pinch of salt, a pinch of chili flakes, some dried basil, some dried oregano, and then giving it a mix. Once your dough is fully risen, we will begin to make our Detroit style pizza. Grab a square pan, we used a metal cake tin, and place in some olive oil, rubbing all the way around the pan. This is important, as otherwise the pizza will be very hard to get out at the end. We then place our pizza dough face down directly into the pan, pushing it into each corner of the pan, making sure that the entire bottom is covered. We then place some toppings down. We went for some chorizo. We then liberally start to put down cubed cheddar, specifically putting it around the edges. As stated at the beginning, this will create a very crispy and incredible tasting crust. We then place on some pre-grated mozzarella and some Parma ham. We then place spoonfuls of the tomato sauce in strips across the pizza, doing 3 strips in total, placing in a preheated oven for around 15 to 20 minutes, or until the edges are very crispy and the cheese on top has started to brown slightly. You will need a knife to go around the edges to make sure that it comes out clean. As you can see, the side has got a layer of cheese that has crisped up on top of the bread, and the bottom is a nice dark brown colour. This means that the pizza will be nice and crispy from the top all the way through to the bottom, as well as having a nice soft interior. If you're making this to share, make sure you get the corner piece, as this is the best part of the entire pizza. Now we'll start on the Italian style pizza. We're going to combine some melted butter with some finely chopped garlic. This is going to create some garlic butter that will brush around the crust of the pizza, also adding a pinch of salt. We then rub some oil onto some baking paper. Doing this as I've done it before, where I've just used flour on top of a pizza peel, or if you was using a baking tray, and I found that the taste of flour is still there on the bottom of the pizza when it's done. This also seems to help crisp the pizza on the bottom. We then place the pizza dough face down onto the baking paper, and using our fingers creating a crust around the pizza, as we don't want to flatten any of the crust. We then push down the pizza dough from the middle going outwards, ensuring that we don't touch the crust that we just formed. doing this until it reaches the size of a pizza and is thin, but not too thin where it would tear. We then put 1 to 2 tablespoons of the pizza sauce we made and rub it around the entirety of the pizza and not touching the crust. This may seem like less than you'd assume you'd need, but at the end you'll realise you didn't need as much as you thought. We then grate a small layer of parmesan across all of the pizza, including the crusts, a small layer of grated cheddar cheese, and an equally sized layer of pre-grated mozzarella. We used pre-grated mozzarella instead of fresh, as this contains a much lower amount of moisture, meaning that when we put them in the oven, it will release a lot less liquid when it melts. We then again place some chorizo on top of the pizza as our topping. I'd also say if you're someone that likes a lot of toppings on their pizza, make sure you don't overfill the pizza when you're doing the toppings. Preheat the oven to as hot as the oven can go for at least 20 to 30 minutes before using, as you want the oven as hot as it can possibly be. We then place it onto our pizza steel. If you're not using a steel, place it directly onto your stone, cast iron, or your baking sheet. After around 4 minutes, we remove the baking paper, as this will help develop the crust and the colour on the bottom of the pizza. If you're not using a steel, remove the baking paper when pizza is no longer sticking to it. We then left our pizza for another 3 to 4 minutes. Take it out of the oven and do one of the most uneven cuts that you've ever seen. The pizza will be very crispy on the outside, but also fluffy on the inside. As you can see, the colour on the bottom is much better than you'd see from a takeaway, and more closely resembling that of a restaurant style pizza. We then place some fresh basil on each slice of pizza. We do this now as if we put it in the oven, it would wilt and lose some of its flavour. And then brushing the crusts with the garlic butter that we made earlier. This is an element that I know my family really like, so I would heavily advise you do this at the end of the pizza. And then you have 2 very easy ways to make pizza at home that will make you never want to buy a takeaway again, as this is much cheaper and way more satisfying to eat. Below there will be a written step-by-step guide as well as the ingredient list. The numbers for the ingredients that I used were for 6 people, however I will also put below how much you need for 1 to 6 pizzas. This is great if you want to make it for a group of people, or even if you just want to make it for yourself. You can make multiple doughs and leave them in the fridge. They will last there for at least 3 to 4 days. Thank you for watching, please like and subscribe. Check out the description for our social media handles.